The night was quiet in Malaga, a small Spanish city by the sea. The young boy stood by the narrow window of his family's apartment, staring at the moonlight that washed over the rooftops. His name was Antonio Banderas. At that time, no one could imagine that this boy, who often dreamed in silence, would one day become a world-famous actor and director. But before the fame, before the applause, there was struggle. There was pain. And there were moments of doubt so heavy that he nearly gave up on everything. From the very beginning, Antonio's story was filled with suspense. He was not born into wealth or privilege. His father was a policeman and his mother was a schoolteacher. Their lives were simple, sometimes hard, but they taught him discipline and kindness. Still, Antonio carried a secret pain. He wanted to be something more, but he did not know how to reach it. At the age of 14, everything seemed lost. One summer afternoon, while running on the dusty streets of Malaga, he fell. His leg twisted badly and the pain was unbearable. The doctors said it was serious. Football, his first love, was no longer possible. In those days, Antonio's dream had been to play professionally, to feel the roar of the stadium. Now it felt like someone had stolen his future. He sat alone at night, angry, broken, and filled with questions. "Why me? Why now?" he whispered. His parents comforted him, but inside he felt abandoned by destiny. Then something unexpected happened. One evening he was dragged by a friend to a small theater in town. The smell of old curtains, the sound of wooden floors, the soft glow of the stage. Something inside Antonio woke up. The play began and he forgot his pain. He forgot his broken dream. He felt his heart beating faster. That was the moment, the turning point. The boy who had lost football found another dream, acting. But the path ahead was not smooth. In Spain during those years, becoming an actor was seen as unstable, even foolish. His father wanted him to think of a serious job. Neighbors whispered, "He will fail. Acting is for the lucky ones, not for boys from our street." Yet Antonio's soul burned quietly with determination. He began training in secret, borrowing books, watching plays, and learning lines when no one was watching. Sometimes he practiced in the mirror, repeating the same words again and again until his voice shook with emotion. But there were nights of hunger too. Sometimes he skipped meals, using his small pocket money to buy theater tickets instead of food. He walked miles across the city just to stand at the back of a hall, watching great actors perform, dreaming of one day standing in their place. Every step was a fight against poverty, against doubt, against fear. And yet there was kindness too. One old drama teacher noticed Antonio's fire. She pulled him aside after class one evening. "You have something," she said softly. "A truth in your eyes, never let it die." Those words stayed with him. Still, the world tested him. There was one night when Antonio returned home late, tired from rehearsals, only to hear his parents arguing. His father's voice was sharp, full of worry. "He will waste his life chasing dreams." His mother tried to defend him, but even she sounded unsure. Antonio, standing in the shadows, felt tears well up. Should he quit? Was he being selfish? But then he remembered the stage, the way his heart felt alive under the lights, the way the silence of the audience carried more power than 1,000 words. And he decided, no matter how hard it became, he would not stop. Suspense grew in his life. Would the young man from Malaga ever make it? Would the world ever hear his name? The first big test came when he was barely 19. He was offered a chance to travel to Madrid to audition for the National Theatre of Spain. It was terrifying. He had no money, no clear future, only a dream. His friends warned him, "You'll be crushed. Madrid is too big for us." But Antonio packed a small bag and left anyway. On the train ride, he stared out of the window, his heart pounding with both hope and fear. He whispered to himself, "This is my chance, maybe my only chance." What he did not know was that Madrid would break him before it made him. The train rattled into Madrid. Antonio stepped off with only a small suitcase, a few coins in his pocket, and dreams that felt bigger than the city itself. Madrid was not like Malaga. It was crowded, loud, and full of people chasing the same dream he carried. The first days were hard. Antonio walked street after street, asking about auditions. Most doors were closed before he could even finish his sentence. Others looked at him and shook their heads. "Too young," they said, "too inexperienced." At night, he rented a tiny room with peeling paint and a broken window. Sometimes the cold air came in so sharp that he had to sleep with his coat on. Food was scarce. Many nights he filled his stomach with bread and water, saving every coin for bus fare to auditions. But he refused to give up. One rainy evening, Antonio stood in line outside a theater for an open audition. The rain soaked his clothes and his shoes squelched with every step. When he finally walked inside, shivering, a man at the table frowned. "You're late." Antonio's heart sank. He tried to explain, but the man cut him off. Next, Antonio walked back into the storm, tears mixing with rain. For the first time, doubt crushed him. Maybe his father had been right. Maybe this was foolish. He leaned against a stone wall and whispered, "Am I wasting my life?" But then, as if destiny had been listening, something happened. A fellow actor, an older man with kind eyes, approached him after seeing his disappointment. "You have the face of someone who refuses to quit," he said. "Come tomorrow. There's another audition. Don't stop now." Those words lifted Antonio's spirit. He wiped his tears, nodded, and promised himself he would try again. The next morning, he stood in front of a small theater group. He performed a short monologue he had memorized from a book. At first, his voice trembled, but then it grew stronger. He lost himself in the character, his emotions raw, his eyes alive with fire. When he finished, the room was silent. Then the director leaned forward. "Who are you?" he asked. That moment changed everything. Antonio was given a role, not a lead, not even a major part, but a role. For the first time, he was on a real stage in Madrid. Yet success did not come quickly. His salary was so small that he continued living in poverty. He sometimes borrowed shoes from other actors for performances. But he worked harder than anyone else, rehearsing late, helping with stage sets, even sweeping the floors when needed. His humility earned respect. One evening after a show, Antonio overheard two older actors talking backstage. "That boy from Malaga, he's different," one said. "Yes," the other replied. "He acts with his soul, not just his voice." Those words gave him strength. Still, the road ahead was filled with trials. In his early 20s, Antonio faced rejection after rejection for bigger roles. Casting directors told him he did not have the right look, the right accent, or the right connections. Once he was even told bluntly, "You'll never make it beyond small theaters." He went home that night, sat in the dark, and thought about giving up. But then he remembered his teacher's words, "Never let the truth in your eyes die." So he pressed on. Then suspense returned in the form of an unexpected meeting. While working in a small theater, Antonio caught the attention of a man who would change his life forever, Pedro Almodóvar, a young but rising Spanish filmmaker. Pedro watched Antonio perform and felt something unusual. His voice, his presence, his honesty on stage, it was rare. After the show, Pedro approached him and said, "I want you in my next film." For Antonio, it felt unreal. Film was another world, a dream too far away. But now it was calling his name. Still, fear haunted him. Could he succeed in front of a camera? Could a boy from Malaga truly step into cinema? The suspense was thick. Antonio's future was opening before him, but the risk was greater than ever. One failure could close every door. On the night before his first film shoot, he lay awake in his small room. The city outside was quiet, but inside him, storms raged. "Will I rise?" he whispered, "or will I fall?" What Antonio didn't know was that this step would not only transform his career, but also shape Spanish cinema for years to come. The film set smelled of paint, cables, and nervous energy. Antonio stood under the lights, his heart racing. It was his first movie with Pedro Almodóvar, a director whose vision was bold and unlike anything he had ever seen. He felt out of place at first. The cameras looked like giant machines ready to swallow him. Every step, every glance, every word felt heavy. When the camera rolled for the first time, Antonio froze. His lines came out stiff, his movements awkward. The crew exchanged uncertain looks. A whisper traveled across the set, "Maybe he's not ready." Antonio's chest tightened. Doubt clawed at him. Had he made a mistake? Was this dream too big? Then Pedro walked up to him quietly. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he said, "Don't act, just feel. Forget the camera, let your truth speak." Those words unlocked something deep inside. The next take was different. Antonio didn't just deliver lines, he lived them. His eyes carried pain, longing, and sincerity. When the scene ended, the room was silent for a moment. Then Pedro nodded slowly. "Yes, that is the man I saw on stage." That film became the beginning of a powerful collaboration. Over the years, Pedro cast Antonio in several of his projects. Together, they shaped Spanish cinema, creating films that were daring, emotional, and unforgettable. But success came with its own battles. Antonio became known in Spain, his face appearing in posters and magazines. People stopped him on the streets. Applause followed him wherever he went. Yet inside, he felt torn. Fame brought temptation, money, attention, endless parties. Many around him chased pleasure and forgot discipline. Antonio sometimes found himself in those places, surrounded by laughter that felt empty, by smiles that disappeared when the lights dimmed. One night after a party, he returned to his room alone. He sat in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. "Is this who I want to be?" he asked himself. Memories of Malaga returned. His mother's gentle voice, his father's quiet strength, the hunger of his early days, the promise he had made to never give up. He realized fame could lift him or destroy him. The choice was his. So he chose humility. Instead of building walls around himself, he stayed close to ordinary people. He walked the streets, greeted neighbors, visited his old drama school, and gave advice to young actors. He carried kindness in the same way he carried his craft. Still, suspense followed him. The world was changing, and Hollywood was calling. Directors in America had noticed him, especially after his powerful roles in Almodóvar's films. Offers began to arrive, roles in languages he did not even speak. At first, Antonio laughed. How could he act in English when he barely knew the words? But the offers kept coming. One director even told him, "Your presence speaks louder than language." It was a terrifying thought. To leave Spain, to step into Hollywood, to risk failure in a land where he was a stranger. Antonio wrestled with fear. His friends warned him, "You'll be lost there, you don't belong." His father's voice echoed in his memory. Acting is unstable. And his own doubts whispered, "What if I fail?" But deep inside, he remembered that boy who once limped through the streets of Malaga, broken by injury, and how theater had given him a second chance. He knew this was his next turning point. On the day he packed his bags for America, he stood at his mother's door. She touched his face gently and said, "Don't forget where you come from." He nodded, tears in his eyes. When his plane lifted off, Antonio stared out at the clouds. He whispered to himself, "Spain made me, but now I must find out who I can be in the world." Little did he know, Hollywood would test him harder than anything before. Rejection, humiliation, and unexpected struggles were waiting across the ocean. The airplane touched down in Los Angeles. Antonio stepped into a world that felt larger than life. Skyscrapers rose like giants, freeways roared endlessly, and faces of strangers moved past him in every direction. Hollywood, the land of dreams. But dreams here came with a price. The first challenge was language. Antonio barely spoke English. He could memorize words, but when people around him spoke quickly, the sentences became noise. At his first Hollywood audition, the casting director handed him lines. Antonio tried, but the words stumbled out, broken and heavy. The director frowned. "We need someone who can actually speak the language." Antonio walked out, humiliated. Outside, he sat on the steps of the building, his head in his hands. "How can I survive here if I can't even speak?" he whispered. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Rejections piled up. Sometimes the casting teams laughed kindly, sometimes they were blunt. "Go back to Spain," one man even told him. Money drained quickly. Antonio moved into a small apartment, barely furnished, with only a mattress on the floor and a second-hand table. His meals were simple, cheap sandwiches, rice, sometimes only coffee. At night, he studied English, repeating words from tapes until his voice grew hoarse. He carried a notebook everywhere, writing down phrases he overheard. At auditions, he often failed, but each time he improved a little. Still, the loneliness hurt. In Spain, he had friends, family, applause. Here he had silence, yet kindness sometimes appeared like a light in the darkness. Once after an audition, a fellow actor approached him. "Your accent is strong, but your eyes, they speak. Don't stop." Those words gave him strength, reminding him of his teacher's advice in Spain. Slowly, opportunities came. Small roles at first, silent parts, background characters, anything that would put him on screen. Antonio accepted all of them with humility. He didn't complain, he didn't act entitled. He worked as if every moment was a gift. Then came suspense. One evening, he was called for an audition for a film that could change everything. It was The Mambo Kings. Antonio was nervous. The role required not only acting, but also capturing the soul of music and passion. The casting team watched him closely. Antonio gave everything he had. Though his English was broken, his emotion was powerful. His eyes burned with sincerity. When he finished, there was silence. The director leaned back, studying him. Then, with a small smile, he said, "We'll be in touch." Those 4 words set fire to Antonio's heart. Days later, he received the call. He had been chosen. But the journey was still not easy. On set, Antonio struggled. He often did not understand directions. Sometimes the crew grew frustrated, but he never allowed anger or pride to take over. Instead, he asked gently, learned quickly, and kept pushing forward. When the film was released, audiences noticed him. Critics wrote about the intensity in his performance, the way his presence filled the screen even when his words faltered. Suddenly, Hollywood began to open its doors. Offers came for more roles, different genres, bigger projects. Antonio was no longer the outsider everyone doubted. He was becoming the Spanish star who brought both humility and fire to the screen. But with success came a new struggle: balance. His schedule grew heavy, his face appeared everywhere, and the noise of fame returned. Once again, temptation stood in his path. One evening, after a successful premiere, he returned home to his empty apartment. Reporters had called him the new sensation. Crowds had cheered. But inside his room, there was only silence. Antonio sat on his mattress and whispered, "What is success if I feel alone?" That night, he wrote a letter to his mother back in Spain. "I am grateful," he wrote, "but I miss the simplicity of home. I miss hearing your voice. I miss remembering why I began this journey." His words showed a truth often hidden behind fame. Even when the world applauds, the heart still longs for love, family, and peace. And so Antonio began to search for meaning beyond the stage and the screen. But the world had bigger plans for him. His next films would bring him to global recognition, working alongside great stars, facing both triumphs and heartbreaks that would change him forever. Hollywood was no longer a stranger to Antonio. After the Mambo Kings, more doors opened. He found himself working alongside great actors, names he had once only read in magazines. Every project tested him, but also proved that his journey from Malaga had meaning. One of the turning points came when he was offered a role in Philadelphia, acting opposite Tom Hanks. Antonio was nervous. This was not only a major Hollywood film, it was a story that demanded honesty, compassion, and courage. When the cameras rolled, Antonio gave his heart to the character. He didn't think about fame or reviews. He thought about truth. Audiences noticed. Critics praised him. Hollywood at last saw him as more than the Spanish actor with an accent. He was now a respected artist. Soon after came films like Desperado and The Mask of Zorro. Action, romance, drama, Antonio carried them all with the same passion he once showed on a small theater stage in Spain. He became a global star, his face known across continents. But inside, he never forgot where he came from. He remembered the broken leg that ended his football dream, the small apartment in Madrid, the nights of hunger, and the rejections that nearly crushed him. Those memories kept him humble. Yet fame tested him again. Interviews, flashing cameras, endless travel. Sometimes it was overwhelming. There were personal battles too, mistakes, heartbreaks, and the quiet loneliness that fame often hides. Still, Antonio carried resilience. He leaned on kindness, on humility, on his roots. He gave back whenever he could, supporting theater, mentoring young actors, and speaking openly about his struggles. Then came one of the most powerful chapters of his life, not on stage, not on screen, but in reality. Antonio suffered a heart attack. For a moment, everything stopped. The applause, the cameras, the scripts, they all disappeared. He was face to face with fragility, with the truth that life is delicate. Lying in the hospital bed, he thought about what truly mattered. It was not the fame, not the awards, not the red carpets. It was love. It was family. It was kindness. After his recovery, he spoke openly about this turning point. "Life gave me a second chance," he said softly, "and I want to use it well." He returned to acting, but with a deeper fire. In Pain and Glory, directed again by Pedro Almodóvar, Antonio poured his soul into the role of an aging filmmaker reflecting on life. The performance was raw, honest, and unforgettable. It won him international awards, but more importantly, it touched hearts. Audiences around the world wept. They saw not just an actor, but a man who had walked through pain, love, fear, and resilience, and still chose kindness. In one interview, Antonio smiled gently and said, "My journey has been long, filled with ups and downs, but the truth is simple. Respect others, hold on to love, and never forget your roots." His words carried the weight of a life lived fully. The boy from Malaga, who once stood broken on the streets after losing his football dream, had become one of the most beloved actors in the world. But more than that, he had become a symbol of humility, resilience, and kindness. The story of Antonio Banderas is not just about acting. It is about the power of falling, rising, and choosing love over pride, kindness over fame. And as the curtain falls, we are left with a simple truth. Greatness is not measured by applause, but by the hearts you touch along the way.